Welcome to You Got Moxie, the podcast about the how of change making. I'm your host, Julie Ann Crommett, and in our final episode for season 1, we're so excited to have Bing Chen. Bing is an impact founder, investor, and new world builder. He's the executive chairman, chief executive officer, and co-founder of Gold House, the leading cultural ecosystem that unites, invests in, and champions Asia-Pacific creators and communities to power tomorrow for all. Today, he shares his journey from growing up as a third culture kid to becoming a leader in his community through all the work with Gold House. Bing discusses the importance of resilience, the need for change, and the power of community in driving impact. He also shares advice his mother gave him when he was a kid that still drives him to this day. Also, you'll learn how he co-created the term creator economy. Yeah. Please join me in welcoming the incomparable Bing Chen. Welcome, Bing Chen. We're so excited to have you here on the inaugural season of You Got Moxie.
Thank you for having me. Good to see you, Julianne.
Oh my God, it's such a joy for everybody listening. Bing and I have known each other a long time. I'm not going to say the years because now it's getting embarrassing, but we have been co-conspirators in the tech and media world for many years. And Bing, it's just such a joy to have you here because of what you've done with Gold House and in the Asian American Pacific Islander community. And I'd love to kind of kick us off so folks can get to know you a little bit, right? Like I know you really well, but maybe sharing a little bit about your story and how you sort of ended up here today. And in that story, highlighting a moment where you knew change needed to happen. What was that what was that moment for you? And tell us a little bit about yourself as part of that.
I am here because my mother and father tried to have kids for a decade, and we found out it was because of my father's egomaniacism and physical abilities that did not happen. And so when I finally arrived in my mother's womb, there was just this profound amount of joy and resilience that she, I think, biologically instilled in me that was then once I came out. And so I am a profoundly happy person who can get through anything. So I think that's one. The second thing is they raised us on multiple continents. So I was born and raised in Knoxville, Tennessee, which I say is where my heart comes from. In Knoxville, if you have sugar, you give your neighbor sugar for no other reason than that's what you do. You know this.
That's right.
You're from Atlanta.
That's right. ATL, Knoxville in the house. That's what right. It is, my friend.
There's no ulterior anything. Yeah. We moved to Shanghai when I was in middle school in China for my father's job, which is where I say I got my eyes. So it sort of just opened my eyes up to how complex the world is, but also what sort of privilege comes when you are the majority, because most people in Shanghai are Asian. And then finally, I spent high school in the OC, which the best I can say there is I attracted my tastes there. But honestly, I kind of hated it. It was a misfit. But I think being a third culture kid makes you realize at once how different the world is, but also how special difference can be, and then also how concentric we all are. And then I think to that end, the third thing that was really defined me in my life is seeing my father pass away of cancer. Of course, it was cancer. It's always cancer. When I was 15, made me not only sort of diminish any form of importance of triviality, but also made me hone in on only those things that are most essential. And I think being able to have that gift so early of shedding the bullshit and only honing in on literally what is life and death has entirely guided my life. And so when you ask like, when did I think there was a change that was needed? I mean, I don't know. I feel like that's every day. Like, I mean, I need to change my diet as of this morning. But like, I think in principle, because of this sort of joyful resilience, I think because of this, yes, you're different in Tennessee, but that makes you special. Yes, you're a majority in Shanghai, but that comes with privilege. Like, I think the way that informs how I build is what are our intrinsic strengths, particularly when no one is watching us, when no one believes in us, and how do we grow them at the largest commercial, critical, and cultural level, whether it's creating the creator economy at YouTube, whether it's creating this movement known as Gold House worldwide. I think that's the important lens.
You know, two things that you said that really struck me, and I don't even know if you know this about me, but I lost my godfather when I was 8 years old to a massive heart attack. He was 37. Oh my God. And I'm 38 now, and I know you can identify with this. He was an actor and a movie critic, and he's the one that introduced my brother and I to this idea that filmmaking was a career, that like working in
Oh,
entertainment was a career. Like, so the whole reason I do what I do is really because of him, and same with my brother. But that profound sense of how time functions and your time on this earth, and in the ways that you think about that shifting when you lose somebody earlier in your life is I think, a very real thing, and we don't talk about it enough. And I think it creates a sense of urgency
yes.
in the gut, at a cellular level
Yes.
almost. So that just spoke into me, and I wanted to say thank you for
Thank you
sharing
very
that about
much.
your father,
I'm sorry to
because
hear. I'm sorry to hear about your godfather and your experience, but I agree with you. This is a sad privilege to have, but an
yes,
essential one. And so I suppose all good.
all good. No, absolutely. And also in a way that their spirit or direction in your life continues through you and then into other people. And I think about that a lot, of like continuing work almost, or continuing journey from somebody. And the other thing that really resonated with me, and I'm sure a lot of our listeners who identify as third culture kids, is that question you brought up about difference and how much you realize there is so much difference and nuance in the world, and also the specialness in difference. When you start to recognize, right, that change needs to happen, or you start to synthesize these differences in the world, it can at once feel really overwhelming because there's a lot to do, right? Like there's so much that we could do, that we could help each other understand more, that you could build on yourself, that you could make impact in your community. And I'd love to know from you, like, how did you know where to start, or how did you think about starting? And I'm thinking really specifically, just to tie the third culture kid thread through, about Gold House and that moment of how did you start? How did you begin? Tell us a little bit about that origin story and anything practical that people could think about.
Yeah, I mean, I think when building, especially when we're trying to solve problems either we didn't create, or more challengingly, problems whose answers or fruits we will never see in our lifetime, I think it has to start with what is your mission and how does it translate to a practical vision. I think a lot of us are trying to fix problems that we are not destined or sort of viscerally attuned to, and so there's a slate of different sort of meaning of life or mission exercises I think we should avail of ourselves first. The second thing is understanding why one is uniquely qualified to solve that particular mission. I find that a lot of people sort of miss this as well. The third thing is there's this sort of romanticization of starving, living on your like best friend's couch, et cetera, when you're ever starting anything out. The unfortunate reality of most of those who've sort of gone on their own as entrepreneurs and so forth came from middle class sort of backgrounds and often had a plan B. There's a lot of sort of how do you say, inequitable talk around those who can and cannot there, but for another day. But the reality is, most people had a plan B and were financially stable in some form. And so, to that end, I think the third step is figuring out what your MVL is, or your MVP. So, what is your minimally viable living standard? This should literally be a dollar amount that you need to live. Not necessarily thrive, but to live enough. You don't need to go to every gala. You don't need to buy every sort of new pair of shoes or whatever it is. But having that number is really important, and making sure that number is satisfied is important as well. The fourth thing is deadline. Deadline, as we just alluded to, is sort of the best human motivation. So I tend to think that it takes at least 1, ideally 2 years to get anything up and running at a stable state. And giving yourself that grace and that longevity to do so, I think, is also really important. I now have, I overtell this story, but I now have 37 personal, direct, self-made billionaire friends. These are not individuals who came from family offices. We're all
Wow.
middle class. Even if they came from a billionaire family and made their own, I don't count any of them. I'm truly meaning like maximum middle class, made it, founded the defining business of our time. And the reason I invoke this is because 100% of them will tell you that the single greatest contributor to their success was persistence. It wasn't necessarily being smart or resourced or having some defendable product. Sure, all that is always true. But the thing that really separates the good and great is that sort of persistence. And so once again, I find that people who don't find themselves successful in the way that they want, it's often because they ended the deadline too early. Giving yourself sort of the grace of time, I think, is important. The next thing that I think is particularly true for those of us in the cultural space, in addition to the commercial space, is, as Oprah once said, you can do it all, just not all at once. And I think this is particularly true. The trick of this is to sequence, and not just to sequence in order, but to sequence with the anchor that is most foundational and also financially sustainable, and then identifying its adjacencies that you can go after from there. So for us within Gold House, the way that we started was Kevin Lin, the founder of Twitch, and I, who's one of the principal co-founders, went on this roadshow over 9 months with 500 leaders and asked them, if you were to harness the power of the global majority, which is, of course, the Asian diaspora, 62% of the world, what would you do and why? Everyone said the exact same 3 to 4 things in the exact same descending order. The first was, there's no mutual support among our diaspora for a variety of collectivist mentality reasons. The second is, we hate how we're projected in media. Asian women are grossly fetishized. Asian men are emasculated. Third is, none of us can penetrate the C-suites or boards or sustain corporate leadership, particularly in the West, for reasons we can debate all day long. And then finally, fourth is, despite being the fastest growing population and electorate, we are the least likely to register and actually vote. And so even though we may have a president who's one of us very soon. And so anyway.
In fact, when we air this episode, it will be the day after the election. So everybody listening right now, we're crossing our fingers on the past on this.
100%. Yes. Let us pray. Let us pray. But yeah, so the reason I mentioned that is that's obviously 4 macro industry issues that one could try to tackle at once. But we realized that all good things happen sequentially. And we realized that media representation was actually a universally applicable, inoffensive, and numerically achievable rallying cry. Specifically, no one thought that there was a viable creative market for Asia Pacific led or visible stories. Let's just demonstrate that there is a market, specifically through a distribution apparatus that became now our agency, but something known as Gold Open, where we sort of snap our fingers and any Asia Pacific film can be #1 opening weekend at the box office, a movement that has launched more than 36 times in the last 5 years and been instrumental to Parasite, to Everything Everywhere All at Once. So anyway, so the lesson here is, you don't need to do all things at once, but you do need to sequence through anchors and then secondarily adjacencies. And then the final thing I would say is just to go back to like childhood, I was one of like 3 people of color, as far as I remember, in my school in Knoxville. But I never felt different or lesser. In fact, I was the only kid who got invited to everyone's birthday party, which I often would remember as the currency of well-likeness when you're a child. And I remember my mom constantly thinking like the things that were different about me, she constantly affirmed that it was not different, but that it was actually special. And when she would ask me what I wanted to be when I grew up and so forth, she would actually chastise me pretty abruptly if I said anything that was derivative or existed in the real world. Because her comment was, why would you want to be anyone but yourself? And would constantly, like, I would name names like Martin Luther King Jr. and Oprah and Disney, and she'd be like, all these people are important and special, but they are not the version that you will be. Why would you ever compare yourself to them? And it wasn't positioned as like you are better or lesser. It's you are different and therefore special. So I think that's the last thing I think about. There's so much sort of weird competitive derivative work these days. And to an extent, learning and adaptation are fine and valid. But I mean, we often say at Gold House, like, if anyone else can do it, we're not going to touch it. Because why would we, right?
Why would you?
If someone else is already doing it, our job is to gas them up. Like I'm not here to, convention is death to me, and so imitation is not flattery. It's death. And so
there's already about like 8 t-shirts in all of what you said that I'm like, this is incredible. It's so true. Real. Yeah.
It's true though. Like, I know it's difficult, but like, we bootstrap this, we can do anything with nothing. The end, so like, let us be proof of that.
Amen. Just on all levels, and what I loved is how you outlined the sequencing piece. And again, like, because you can't be, just to quote the movie title, everything, everywhere, all at once. And for folks, please check out goldhouse.org to kind of dive a bit more into the details of what Bing has been mentioning.
The master plan.
The master plan. The master plan.
It's enumerated under the about section. Just read all that. That's basically
it just says, we'll send you there. There'll be a link, everybody, goldhouse.org. But also, what your mom said is actually incredibly powerful, at least to me. This idea of like not be a derivative of anybody else, but that you are uniquely you, and that is the power, right? Like the line that often theater kids will say is like, "Why would you play anybody but yourself? All the other parts are taken."
Oh, yeah.
Why would you play anybody but yourself? All the other parts are taken. And of course, there's no small parts, only small actors, which is the thing said all the time, and that's true because that's our global collective. That's the thing you've been working on, right? And you and I have talked about this also in how to connect it into other communities like the Latin community and start to build real change across places and intersections of identity, geography, whatever it might be, because that's really where the power is. The power is in all of our uniqueness coming together as opposed to being sanded out, if you will. And your mom's words really just speak into my soul around that.
That's exactly. I mean, I think this is why I always gravitated towards you, like Julianne, because like we come from a place of power, not punishment. And just to like give another practical lesson of this, I remember in poli sci in college, we had learned that like all these politicians would invoke platitudes like we're more similar than we are different, and like all smart, cynical people. I just like roll my eyes every time until I went to YouTube and was tasked with globalizing the partner program from 9 to 42 countries, which would eventually bring in 40% of top line revenue. That's when I standardized the term creator, and then Annie Baxter, my PR lead, came up with creator economy, and we launched the gold play button. Like basically the whole renaissance that the world now knows as creator economy came from this moment. And the insight that we had was, how can we actually support the Walt Disney Company in Burbank and an individual musician in Bangalore? These are such disparate entities. And we realized after sort of extensive research that all creators, whether again you're a $300 billion capitalized media company or someone with no money to your name, probably in debt in your mother's basement playing guitar, every creator wants the same 6 things in the exact same descending order. They just talk about them differently. So they are fame, fortune, creativity, strong skill set, connection with other creatives, and then recognition from the principal platform or distribution outlet that you're in. Now, let me give an example of like how this may manifest differently in the fame side, which is about building a large engaged audience and also qualitative celebrity underpinnings. When a musician hosts an event, it's called a concert. When a stand-up comedian hosts an event, it's called a stand-up show. But these are both concerts and stand-up shows, invariably the same thing. They're just events. They involve tickets, concessions, lights, a stage, an audience, probably a couple microphones, etc. They're just events. They just may talk about them differently. They may be a different scale, but they are invariably the same thing. And so I think that's also really important insight of, yes, we all have our differences. There's no question about it. And sometimes these differences yield existential, distinct behaviors and experiences in life. But we also, because we are the same species, at least for now, want more often the same things than we don't. And I'm convinced that humanity only wants 3 things. We want to live as long as possible. We want to have a meaningful impact, which hopefully is concentric with a strong career, though not always. And then third is we want strong familial relationships, having a spouse, having kids, having best friends, having a village that you can live and love with, right? Everyone just wants those 3 things. They, of course, manifest differently. We know millennials aren't getting married. They're not buying property. We all know. But I think coming from a place of, well, what binds us as opposed to what divides us is so much more important for the long term. And I now have living proof in at least 2 significant, in one case multi-billion, the other multi-9-figure sort of indications that this is indeed true.
Absolutely, 1,000%. And folks, if you needed the data, you got it here with Bing. If anybody's arguing with you otherwise, and I think
I don't lie, people do.
I know, understand why people. It's just facts. I'm like, the math is mathing, people. I don't understand. But you know, and Bing. First of all, can we just pause on the fact that essentially you created the language of creator economy? Anybody else pick up on that?
I've noticed I've gotten a little cockier about it. I'm in a new season on this because I saw a bunch of VCs take credit for it, and I was like, y'all are literally lying.
No.
Like literally in 2011, like Annie Baxter, who I love, who's our PR lead.
Annie is amazing. I remember Annie from
You
Google
remember
too.
Annie?
Yeah.
Yeah, she was like being like, I have this idea, and I don't know if she came up with it, Victoria Grant came up with it, who knows? But she said it in a way I'll forever remember. We're in the front of San Bruno, and she's like, no one is taking it seriously internally, because like I believed in what we were doing, and like I don't know, that's all that matters to me. But she's like everyone still wants to be HBO, whatever, Netflix here, like we need to be taken more seriously. I think we should call this an economy, and I've been playing with this idea called creator economy, and that was right after I'd gotten approval, which was so insane that this was a thing, to change the lexicon of partner and video maker to creator. And I was like, oh, this makes so much sense, Annie. Like, we should call it the creator economy. She gets credit for the whole term. I will take credit for standardizing creator, though.
Perfect. Look, you heard it here, folks. Annie Baxter and Bing Chen.
I love you, Annie. We miss you.
There we go. We love you, Annie. We do. Oh my gosh, the ties that bind. And these are not moments, and I certainly know because we're friends, moments without challenges. Real, sometimes very practical challenges, and sometimes really deep philosophical challenges, all kinds of challenges. And so question for you, and again, practical examples, like, what was, if there's a moment or two moments that you can really identify that you faced a challenge in either, whether it's from YouTube or Gold House, another part of your life, and how did you think about moving through that challenge? And what advice do you have when thinking about being met? Because change making is hard. It is not a walk in the park, and not for the faint of heart, as you were saying, that persistence piece. What strikes you?
I have two, but do we have time for two?
Yeah, let's do it.
Okay. So I was part of a startup after I left YouTube that basically like promised the world, said it was going to be like, let me be like a creative and like all this sort of stuff. That they said the product was already done in a month. Just like all of these like great things that I wanted to hear as someone who dreams of being the next Walt Disney. And basically what happened is the product was not done a month later. Even a year later, it was about 30% done. Further, our CTO was a walking Me Too movement, literally sexually harassed our head of product and the head of HR, like during a one-on-one in broad daylight in the restaurant below. And so a year later, I told them that I need to go because basically the product is not delivering. My business functions obviously all over delivered. We basically built the whole business on them. And this behavior, which was pre-Me Too movement, which we didn't have the language and so forth to talk about in a mainstream way, was just like unacceptable to me as the son of a single, effectively mother. And I forever remember the executive chairman of the board told me, Bing, don't be naive. These things happen all the time. And I remember just feeling immense defeat because even though I had over delivered and even though I had not harassed or touched anyone, I felt complicit somehow in this failing. And I think this was particularly difficult because the year before I was like the hot young thing at YouTube, like fast promoted, most decorated, most like I got on the floor, all the things. And then you go to like this shit show and it's just embarrassing. It's one thing to have nothing. It's another to have everything and then lose it in some way. And so I remember that was the moment I learned the hard way that there is a great wisdom and personal grace in knowing what you do not have control over and letting it go. And it was clear that this thing that I would walk away from was something I had to let go of. And that's difficult for someone who is convinced he can fix everything. And has for his whole life. It became my job at YouTube to put out fires, and even today, like I am the firefighter and I'm the garbage dumpster eater, and so that was,
you basically have a little minion following you around, that like the little minion characters going be-doo, be-doo, be-doo.
Exactly. For all the garbage that we never created. But yeah, I think like it can be tough when something is not your fault and then suddenly they start shit talking you because of course the person who departs must be the deficient one. And I think the way I've like reconciled that experience was, one, you should always date before you marry, before you build something. So that was an important lesson. And I've adhered to that for the most part. The second is really letting things go early is a sign of love to yourself. And I remember like just like our own motto, like Disney and Beauty and the Beast. I remember when the Beast lets Belle go in the last act, and Cogsworth or whatever his
Lumiere.
face, Lumiere, asked him like, "Sir, why did you let her go?" Oh, Cogsworth asked him, and he goes, "Because I love her, And I remember being so confused as like a 3-year-old watching this,
Right.
because if you love someone, of course you hold on to it and you fix it. But there is a higher form of love of letting go. And I think that's one. The second is, if you are a missionary, thoughtful, resourceful, good person, you will always be fine. It just may be bitter in the near term. And so my sort of like tour de grace on this was our single biggest investor, the legendary John Doerr, who's the first investor in like Google, Amazon, all that,
Yes.
is my single biggest investor and donor now at Goldhouse. And so
Wow.
if the person who bet on that now bets on you, there is no better indication of
No.
success. And so anyway, so that's definitely one. The other one is the single greatest criticism of Goldhouse is that we are elitist. Now, let me go through this. I've spent a lot of time on this because I am the first person to admit wrong, and I constantly want to be better and believe in sort of a federative model of like, let's get better together. The way that we think about change is we actually call it equitable excellence. So the idea is that we actually have focused on investing in, distributing, getting awards for the best films and filmmakers, the best series, the best companies, because I do believe and know numerically the best content and the best companies will be seen by the most people, so therefore can change the most minds. And the best companies can employ the most people because they have the highest valuations, capacity, scale, and so forth. Further, as you and I both know, having been in the system, if we invest in creative and companies that are not good, it not only loses us money, which then our investors will be like, we're not going to contribute to this movement anymore. So it's not a sustainable strategy financially, but it actually makes us look bad, especially when we're trying to reverse misconceptions. If a studio head sees that we get behind a movie that is objectively bad, they will think Asians are bad at creative. And you and I both know it is that simple. It really is.
No, it really is that simple.
It
It
really is
is
that simple.
an impossibility of failure. Like Chris Rock very succinctly put it about 20 years ago in his comedy special, where he said, "True equity or true equality is when the black man can fail equally as the white man."
That's right.
And
Mediocrity.
and that is what it is. Like 1000%.
That's
Yes.
exactly right. When we can celebrate our mediocrity, we have made it in the mainstream. Now, we
Correct.
will get there. We are not there yet. And
No.
so we have to remember, as Oprah once said, we can have it all. We can support everyone, just not at once. And so our approach has been, let's Robin Hood the resources of basically the big and give it to the many. One specific example, the majority of films we invest in and promote are actually independent films. Not only do we not make money on these, we lose money on every single one, basically every single one. Straight up. I have mouths to feed because doing God's work, and this is an unfortunate stereotype in many cultural sort of realms, doing God's work should not be free. Doing God's work should not be nonprofit-y. Doing God's work is the most expensive work. I'll go further. My mother,
Please.
my mother was the highest paid woman in the state of Tennessee for years, despite being first generation, coming from quite literally nothing financially and not speaking English. Okay. She decided to retire and be a stay-at-home mom when we were in third grade. Why? Because a stay-at-home mother is the hardest job in the world. You have to work more hours, more days, and not only get paid nothing, you have to invest money in something that may start paying off 22 years later. That is the worst investment imaginable, and yet so many people do it, and it is why all of us are here. Literally why all of us are here.
Amen.
So
I say this about teachers too, as the
Teachers,
daughter of a
100%.
teacher, of a public school teacher.
Exactly
Yes.
right. Doing God's work should not only not be free, it should be prized. And I have not only mouths to feed, I have the most talented mouths in the world to feed right now. So the thought that we should suddenly support everyone at once is impractical, is impossible. And so, at least right now. And so my approach again is, let's use the capital from these big ass companies. Let's pay for the majority of the independent, in this case, filmmakers and films that we support. And then over time, it'll get there. Now, we have now won, as you know, and thanks to you in large part, we've now won the business of the big media companies and the big
Yes.
venture capitalists, et cetera. We're now scaling it out to the next generation. This is why we have our emerging filmmakers fellowships. This is why we have our emerging startup accelerators, et cetera. So the Robin Hooding has already happened, and it's happened very quickly. But that is also a learning of, once again, you have to not only know that we can have it all, just not all at once, but two is you also have to be comfortable with pissing off the right people at the right time. And as someone who is very Mr. Popular his whole life, and then suddenly started to elicit vitriol for doing nothing else than good work as best as I can at the largest scale that I'm capable of, that was a difficult lesson to learn. But I
Yes.
think you find, and I feel 100% confident saying this now, because I've dug into it. The people who have negativity or cynicism towards your work are almost, if you're doing good work and you're a good person, are almost always uninformed or envious. And in fact, I would say 100% of the people on the glass end are in one of those two buckets.
I second that.
And yeah, and like to an extent, if we were like a congressional representative body for an entire diaspora, this I would use a very different tenor of absolutely we need to call people in and welcome them and all that. Anyone who claims to represent an entire diaspora and one that is 5 billion people is lying, is straight up lying.
Yeah, there
So
is absolutely no way
impossible.
that is possible.
It is impossible. It is also
Yes.
deeply arrogant. And
Correct.
so that's
Also, just as a side note, nobody listening, if you take any lesson from this podcast away, should ever assume that anybody you know is the representative of whatever communities they are a part of.
correct.
Like, just
No one
I've
speaks
just
for
a PSA out there.
100%. I mean, let's take this the other way. Most people don't even know how to speak well. How are they going to speak for an entire group of people? Let's get real about
1,000.
that. I mean,
Come
come on.
on.
Humans are inconsistent. Like, we don't even know what we want half the time. I don't even know what I want for dinner.
We're flawed on every level. Like, we
100%.
we really don't even have a ton of conscious thought, actually.
100%.
Let's not even get into that whole thing. Yeah.
100%. And so
Yeah.
I think that's number two. And then third is like operating from a place of abundance. If we're not doing it, my feedback is always either A, that's great feedback. Let me see how we can collaborate, bring that in as much as possible. Because we do call as many people in as possible, of course. But then the other side is like, if we can't do it, my comment is always, well, why don't you?
Right?
And I will help finance it. I will gas you up. If you're of quality, I will, of course. And I mean, I'm certain you know this. 99.9% of the time, they just shut up and sit down and don't do anything. Because
1,000.
it's so easy to complain and not create. And it's almost always just the complainers who don't create.
Ooh, say that again for the people in the back.
That's
Bing.
true. It's just like,
It's
it's so
true.
easy to run your mouth and not your hands. And like,
Hey,
I'm just in
amen.
this era where I just don't care. Because I'm here. No, I'm
Yes.
serious. Like,
No, but
I'm
for
over
real.
here- yeah, I'm over here being busy, being effective, and ensuring my team is happy and effective, and that we can scale and help as many people as possible. And we'll refine again, and we do retros on retros on retros. We do live feedback immediately because I don't like things to fester, et cetera. Of course, we do all that. But I think it's really important whenever you're creating something new to remember you should assume you will piss. I used to call this the Kanye effect before he became really problematic. But basically, you should assume if you're doing anything new, you're going to piss off half the people. Because, and this is winning, because humans are very binary creatures, like hot and cold, Republican, Democrat, et cetera. It doesn't matter how much we think we're centrist. We always come from some side. And so if you come from this side of building, even if you're close to middle, you'll still piss off everyone here. And that's just the nature of humanity. That's okay, Candidly, if you're not doing something like that in a thoughtful way, if you're not pissing off the right people in a thoughtful way, you're probably just floating.
That's right.
In which case, why are you even doing it?
That's right.
It's more.
Absolutely. I always say if you're not pissing somebody off, you're not doing it right. Because that's just the reality. Because humans don't like change. Like, we have an aversion as a species to it. And so if you are meeting resistance, that is a good thing. That is what I keep reminding people right now in a time, and for anybody listening later, this is 2024, like, that when you are meeting that level of resistance, when there is that much backlash to inclusion and diversity and equity, like, I'm like, that means we're doing it right, guys. Because honestly, otherwise there wouldn't be an allergic reaction, because humans would just kind of go along. You know what I mean? But this means that something real is happening. And actually the instinct, instead of retreating, is actually to lean in more. It's actually to push harder, to keep going, because that actually means we're having a breakthrough. And breakthroughs only happen at the margin. Somebody said this on a call I was on, Jeff Hines, I'll give him full credit, that change comes at the margins of our discomfort. And I was like, ooh, say that again, because it's also the way you build muscle in your body.
I was going to say, this is how chemistry works. That's
correct.
Exactly right.
And we are products of the natural world. Yep, exactly. And so, Bing, as we're wrapping up, I Gosh, I love you so much, brother. I really do. In like the deepest way, you're talking about the different kinds of love. Just to end us out, times can be hard. Things can get hard. Work can be draining, especially if you're doing change work, especially if you're endeavoring to move things right within your community or field. What do you do to recharge, or what advice do you have in terms of continuing to find your energy or find that purpose over and over again?
Honestly, I sit, sleep, and play PlayStation 5, Miles Morales, and read poetry.
Yes.
So that's that. I also, I mean, I hate to go back to my mom again. Oh, actually, no, it's a good thing I keep going back to my mom. My mom
Yes.
once told me, right after my dad died, that life is tough, but so are we. And I thought, oh, it's like it's sort of like the Obama story when he's like really disheveled and sad in that like
Right.
whatever town hall, and like someone in the back who's like some like stalwart in the community was like fired up, ready to go. And then he goes and like, well, we can change the city, we can change the nation, we can change the nation, we can change the world. So this is one of those things. Like, I don't know, y'all. Like, how do I say? There's so many like small platitudes. Like today may suck, and like you know what? If you're a startup founder, you're a creative, 51% of your day is gonna suck. That's a great day, you know. But the good news, you don't have to live that day again. And the good news is we get to try again, and we get to try again because we let ourselves. And so, yeah, I don't know. I only have hallmark platitudes to tell you, but honestly, as we've gotten into like our mid 30s, late 30s, mid
I was
30s,
gonna say
like
late through.
yeah, mid 30s. But as we get into our mid 30s, like I'm realizing how many of the tried and true platitudinal cliches are true because I now have experience to validate them. And so I think, yeah, if I were like to distill it very simply, it's like I believe so much. I believe as much in human resilience as I do in human wonder, and that has gotten us into, through, and beyond everything from the moon to destroying ourselves with AI. Yeah, and then I think that the final thing in terms of like the cultural D&I, et cetera, work is like this work fucking sucks. And I shouldn't say that. And this work is this work.
Not the quote we were going for, but totally true in terms of sometimes the day to day.
Oh, it's exhausting. It's the worst. It's like I say this privilege, like having been a creative, having been like, a tech founder, having been like in a big company, like this is the hardest work. There's no question, because it is dealing with problems that are so confounded by every dimension you could imagine, are actually existential and mortal for some communities, and are constantly changing and have no resources. Like it's just like it's just the worst. But I think like I think on that note, once again, you can solve it all, just not all at once. And so if you have to turn it off and not respond to something or not go to something, you should. And it's not because you're being selfish. It's actually, in the same way that the beast lets Belle go, the highest form of selflessness, because you are recharging yourself so you can sustain yourself for everyone else. And I think that's something that like we only see what's in front of our eyes as a species, and we don't actually realize like once you close your eyes and then reopen them, you're rejuvenated so you can do more, you know?
Absolutely. 1000. And by the way, anything that brings it back to Beauty and the Beast is.
I'm sorry, it's my favorite movie. It's
Oh
the
my God.
best.
It's the best.
Weird, like the whole bestiality, like whatever
Weird.
circumstance is
But
weird, but
yes. And
that's
Belle
not
was
right.
also a super smart princess. Anyway, who liked to read.
Smartest.
Right. It's so funny. I referenced this movie literally last night at the pizza joint I was at. This is totally
Wait,
true.
in what sense? In what
In the
capacity?
sense I was the host who was calling trivia. Yes, I play weekly trivia, everybody. And I was on Jeopardy. There we go. That's my flex. We were talking about a movie question, and he was like, I figured you ran up right on Lion King. And I said, oh, yes, the first movie I saw without my godfather, bringing it full circle. And Beauty and the Beast was one of the last movies I saw with him. And so Beauty and the Beast and Aladdin actually hold a very special place in my heart because of that, as does Lion King. And so all to say, see, I knew we were friends, and then all these layers come out. But
People
just to
rest
say,
and smiles on us. Yes.
that's right, exactly. And my former employer is very happy that we're citing titles. But all to say, Bing, that it's absolutely true, and that the platitudes are actually real, and that life actually has to come in and take them on for their own size, and then you realize how real they are.
Yes.
And I just want to say thank you to you for joining us today, for sharing your Moxie sharing
say,
your
I don't know if
life.
there's Moxie. I think there's just a lot of softness here, but
No, there was a lot of Moxie. Okay, I think the listeners would agree, like really strong Moxie energy. And just love you so much, brother. Thank you for stopping by. And hopefully we can have you come back in a future day.
yeah, no, I'm rooting for y'all. Thank you
Awesome.
so much for having me.
Thanks again for joining us for You Got Moxie. Continue to follow us and listen to your favorite episodes at collectivemoxie.com. That's collectivemoxie.com. We're excited to see you next time. Take care.